Baby, tell me what you want. Cool days, warm nights. Yeah, sometimes we all need a little help to make everything just right. Not too hot, not too cold. Goldilocks. And what I want to tell you, babe, is I got the tools to hit that sweet spot every time. I want to help you, babe. I want to blow your mind. I'm your heat pump. When you want it hot, I'm hot for you. I'm your heat pump. When you want it cool, I'm cool with you, babe. Cause I can do it all for you, baby. All you have to do is turn me on, and I'll go on and on for you. Check it out. A part of me goes inside. A part of me goes out. All of me pumping. I'm precisely calibrated to make you scream and shout. Cause I'm electric in your heat. Cause I can move heat in or out till you feel what you wanna be feeling. Yeah, you and me plus electricity equals climatic heat. I'm your heat pump. When you want it hot, I'm hot for you. I'm your heat pump. Blowing it out for you. When you want it cool, I'm cool with you, baby. Don't matter if you're living in the sun or snow, any place you go, I'll be there for you. That's all I wanna do. Yeah, I'm here for you, baby. You feel me? I'm switched on, sipping on electrons. Never gonna burn fuel, cause I prefer to keep the planet cool. All day, all night, I keep humming. Keeping hydrocarbons quaking, cause I'm coming. No time for waiting, I'ma get proliferating. Every state and every nation gonna stimulate the conversation. Ha. It's time to get busy. Cut your gas line, I'm electric in your hizzy. When you want it hot, I'm hot for you. When you want it cool, I'm cool with you, baby. Any way you want it, I got you, baby. I got you, baby.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar to understand the More EV rebate program in Massachusetts and all the stackable electric car incentives. My name is Anna Vanderspeck. I'm the Electric Vehicle Program Director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. I will be the person giving this presentation today, but I will let my colleague introduce herself so you get to know her as well.
Hello, my name is Caitlin Rodriguez. I'm the Drive Green intern for the summer and also the fall. Thank you all for coming and welcome.
Caitlin will be in the chat, so if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to write them into the Q&A function that you should see on your Zoom screen. Caitlin will respond to questions in writing throughout the webinar, but we'll also have time at the end for a Q&A session. Most of us are very familiar with Zoom at this point, but I did want to point you to the closed caption function. So if you look at your Zoom panel, there's a button that says CC. If you need closed captioning, you can click on that, and then the text that I say will appear on your screen as readable language as well. But with that, I will go ahead and jump right in. So as I mentioned, Caitlin and I both work for Green Energy Consumers Alliance. If you're not familiar with us, we are a nonprofit organization working to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. We've been around for over 40 years in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and we achieve our mission both through programs where we offer programs and services where people can learn about various clean energy technologies and then actually make the switch with our help. And we also do advocacy work for state level and local level policies in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island to make sure we've got the state programs and policies in place to actually meet our emissions reductions goals. So I will be giving the presentation today, but there are two other organizations in the background that we want to make sure everybody understands why we had all those logos on the first slide. So the state More EV program, which is the electric car rebate program in Massachusetts, is housed in the Department of Energy Resources, or DOER. And that is the state agency that is responsible for policies and programs that have really anything to do with energy supply. So both the security, diversity, and cost effectiveness of that energy supply, but also the cleanliness of it in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the resilience of it in terms of how we're going to adapt to the effects of climate change. And it is that state agency that houses the state More EV program. The Center for Sustainable Energy, or CSE, is a national nonprofit, and they are the ones that actually administer the rebate program on behalf of DOER. So when you go to the More EV website, or if you email More EV staff, it's actually the Center for Sustainable Energy that you are engaging with. So we're working with the Center for Sustainable Energy to get the word out regarding the More EV rebate, and all of that is under the auspices of the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. So I will go in great detail through More EV throughout this presentation, but just at a high level to start with, More EV is the state rebate program in Massachusetts for electric vehicles. It is an acronym. It stands for Massachusetts Offers Rebates for Electric Vehicles. There are several different sub-programs that we will go through. There's a standard rebate for new vehicles. There's a rebate for used vehicles. There's an adder if you qualify based on your income. There's an additional rebate if you're trading in a very old polluting gas-powered car. And then there's a separate rebate for electric pickup trucks and other vehicles in that class. And for all of these rebates, we'll go through whether you can get them at the point of sale, right at the dealership when you're purchasing a vehicle, or if you have to apply after the fact. So we'll go through all of these one by one and go through the eligibility requirements both for you and the vehicle. First, though, we're going to do a quick electric vehicle 101 and a quick charging 101 just to make sure we're all on the same page on the basics of electric vehicles, because we often get questions about those. Then we'll do a deep dive into the More EV rebate program. We'll go through every one of those sub-programs, and then we'll talk about the federal tax credit, because that is an additional incentive that you can layer on top of the More EV rebate to really substantially bring down the costs of an electric car. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, so please do write any questions you have into the chat, and we'll go over them at the end. So starting right off with Electric Vehicles 101, we'll first talk about the different types of electric vehicles. So the first type is a battery electric vehicle, or a BEV, or a BEV. These are vehicles that are only battery powered. So they've got a big old lithium ion battery. That's usually the base of the vehicle. The range at this point for new vehicles is well over 200, if not 300 miles per charge. They take a couple hours to charge fully, but it depends on the level of charging that you're using, and we'll go over those. And there's tons of models that are battery electric vehicles, but some examples you might be familiar with are the Chevy Bolt, the Hyundai Kona, or the Ioniqs, the Nissan Leaf, all of the Teslas. Those are all pure battery electric vehicles. There are also vehicles that qualify as electric that are called fuel cell electric vehicles. These still use an electric motor, but instead of refueling the vehicle with electricity, you actually refuel it with hydrogen fuel. The benefits of fuel cell electric vehicles are that it takes a lot less time to refuel because you just need a couple minutes to refuel the tank. The drawback is that there are not very many hydrogen refueling stations. So on a convenience front, it's much easier to recharge a battery electric vehicle right now than a fuel cell electric vehicle. Some models you might have heard of are the Hyundai Nexo, the Toyota Mirai, and the Honda Clarity fuel cell. And these are all ones that qualify for the Massachusetts State Rebate Program. There's a third type of electric vehicle that I want to mention, but with a big caveat that these do not qualify for the state rebate program. So this type of vehicle is called a plug-in hybrid, or a PHEV. These are vehicles that have a lithium-ion battery that you can charge up from an external source, but they also have a backup gas tank that can either actually move the vehicle forward or generate electricity to put into the vehicle battery. These tend to have a range of somewhere between 20 to 60 miles on electricity and then a couple hundred miles on gas. And some examples are the Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid, the Toyota Prius Prime, or the RAV4 Prime. Some of you might remember the Chevy Volt with a V as in Victor that was popular a couple of years ago. These are all plug-in hybrids. Some of these models do qualify for the federal tax credit, which we'll talk about later, but they do not qualify for the More EV rebate. So we just wanted to make that clear that More EV is only for those battery electric vehicles and the fuel cell electric vehicles. Some of you may have attended one of our Electric Vehicle 101 presentations before, and in that presentation we go through the benefits of driving electric in a lot of detail. Today, the detail we will reserve for the actual rebate program, but we just wanted to mention real quick, the benefits of driving electric from a societal perspective are that they reduce or eliminate tailpipe emissions. Even if you take into account how the electricity is generated that we're putting into those batteries, they dramatically reduce air pollution, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and in terms of the type of pollution that harms human health. So from a societal perspective, electric vehicles are definitely a superior choice to gas-powered or fossil fuel-powered vehicles. From a driver perspective, there are also key benefits, and those are lower fuel costs and lower maintenance costs that I'll go over in a moment. The lower fuel costs really have to do with the vehicle efficiency. So electric vehicles are much more efficient than gas-powered cars. They waste a lot less of the energy. And an easy way to see that is in the graph on the right, where we're comparing the miles per gallon of popular gas-powered cars with the miles per gallon of electric vehicles. If you haven't heard of that MPGE term before, what that is a measure of how far that electric vehicle can go on the amount of energy that is stored in 1 gallon of gasoline. And that happens to be 33.7 kilowatt hours of electricity. And so if you compare MPG with MPGE, what that allows you to do is really see the difference on an apples to apples basis between gas-powered cars and electric cars. So looking at that graph on the right, Toyota Corolla, for example, gets around 35 miles per gallon, whereas a Hyundai Ioniq 6 gets 140 miles per gallon electric. So that is a way where you can see how much more efficient those gas-powered cars are, and that efficiency translates into lower costs per mile in terms of fuel costs, which, if you're interested in, we've got lots of information on our website to dive into that topic some more. On the left, I just want to point to the fact that the ranges of current electric vehicle models are much higher than most people think. A lot of people, when you think electric car, are still thinking of the early sort of Nissan Leafs that got 80 or 100 miles. At this point, the models that are coming out get well over 200, if not 300 miles per charge. So the range of the electric vehicle models today is definitely enough to meet most people's needs. I mentioned that maintenance costs are much lower for electric vehicles. If you want to dive deep into this, when I share the slides after this webinar, you can click on the link at the bottom for Consumer Reports. They did a study of several thousand gas-powered cars and equivalent electric vehicles in real life, real people's driving costs. and found that over the life of the vehicle, electric cars have about half the maintenance costs of gas-powered cars. And this graph, or this image from the Federal Department of Energy, illustrates that in a slightly different way. So what we're seeing here is a graph of the scheduled maintenance costs for different types of vehicles. So each one of these columns is a different type of vehicle. On the left, we've got internal combustion engine vehicles, or ICE vehicles. And we've got hybrid electric vehicles. These are the traditional hybrid vehicles that don't plug in. Then we've got plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And the furthest on the right, we've got those battery electric vehicles. And you can see that as you move towards a more electrified vehicle, those scheduled maintenance costs go down. And there's a couple different reasons for that. One is there's a whole class of costs that just don't exist in battery electric vehicles. Those are those red costs at the very top of the columns. So battery electric vehicles don't have or don't need transmission service, spark plugs, oxygen sensors, or timing belts. So that's a whole class of costs you don't need to worry about if you're driving a battery electric vehicle. But then even within classes of costs that exist across the spectrum, the costs are less. So a great example of this is brake pads, which is the sort of dark brown slice of this column. When you're driving an electric vehicle, there's a technology called regenerative braking that basically uses magnets to slow you down when you need to slow down rather than relying on those brake pads. And so because you're using the friction brakes less frequently, the brake pads don't wear out as fast, so you have fewer costs replacing those brake pads over the life of the vehicle. So again, when we share these slides, you can dive into all of this in more detail, but the long story short, there's definite savings for electric vehicle drivers on the maintenance front. I'll now move to talk about charging real quick, and then we'll get into the details of the state rebate program. So quick refresher on the types of charging. There's 3 levels of charging. The first level is called level 1. It's also called a trickle charge because it's the slowest type of charging. And this is when you take a level 1 charging cable, which either comes automatically with the vehicle or you can purchase, and you just plug it into a normal 120 volt outlet, the same type of outlet you would plug a laptop or a cell phone into. This adds about 4 miles of range per hour spent charging, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you only drive 40 miles a day and are able to plug in at home and charge overnight, you can replenish what you've used in a day in 10 hours overnight. So a lot of people find this to be sufficient for charging at home. The next level up is called level 2 charging. It's significantly faster than level 1 charging. It can add anywhere between 15 and 30 something miles of range per hour spent charging. The speed really depends on which vehicle you're using and which charger you're using. But these are charging units that you can install at home. We've got a whole guide on how to do that if you're interested, but there are also lots of level 2 charging stations available in the public, and we'll show you shortly how to find them. But these all use a 240 volt outlet. So if you're installing one at home, this is the same type of outlet you might need for an all-electric dryer or a washing machine or something like that. The third level of charging is called DC fast charging. Some people call it level 3 charging. The DC stands for direct current, and this is absolutely the fastest type of charging you can do. This is the type of charging you might do if you're on a road trip and you're stopping at a rest plaza or need to add a whole bunch of miles in a relatively short amount of time. The range of how many miles you can add per half hour of charging is pretty wide because it depends on what vehicle you're driving and what charger you're using. But a lot of the modern vehicles now can add about 100 miles in half an hour. And this is the type of charging you would only do in public. You can't install one of these at home, but it's really there for you in those longer road trips. So there is a lot more public charging available out there than most people think. It's not like a gas station where It's got a big sign on the side of the highway, so you know exactly where it is. These stations are built in places where people are already parked for some amount of time. So gyms and supermarkets and libraries and lots of other locations. We recommend a website or app called PlugShare. The link is at the bottom of the slide, but basically you can go to that website, type in any location, and it will show you what public charging stations are available around that location. So you can see where they are, how much they cost, what type of chargers they have. In these two screenshots, the green flags are for level 2 charging stations, and the orange ones are for DC fast charging stations. And this app is the type where the more you zoom in, the more of these things will pop up. So I definitely recommend, if you're thinking about an electric car, that you poke around PlugShare to see what's available near you and what's available in the places where you might want to drive. PlugShare also has a trip planning function, so you can see, okay, if I need to go from here to there, where would I charge along the way? So that concludes our very quick electric vehicle 101. We will now dive into all of the details of the More EV rebate program. So this is the same slide I showed earlier that just reviews the different types of rebates under the More EV banner. Again, they're only available for battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. They're not available for plug-in hybrids. And there are those several different sub-programs available, which we'll dive into now. This table is full of good information, but also a little busy, but we're just going to talk through it row by row by row. And then the following slides will talk about the specific eligibility requirements for each of these sort of sub-programs. So the first row is More EV Standard. This is the rebate for new light-duty vehicles. The amount is $3,500. It's available for the purchase or lease of eligible new battery electric or fuel cell electric vehicles. And it's available for Massachusetts residents, businesses, and nonprofit organizations. The rebate is available both at the point of sale and post-purchase. When I say it's available at the point of sale, I mean that if you go to one of the dealerships that's listed on the More EV website as participating in this program, then you can get that cost reduction right at the point where you're paying for the vehicle, rather than waiting to get reimbursed after the fact. But it is still available post-purchase. If you purchase from a dealership that's not part of the program, or just forget when you're at the dealership, you can go to the More EV website after the fact, fill out a form, and get a check in the mail for that $3,500. The next program, or the next line here, is More EV Used. This is for used light-duty vehicles. The amount is also $3,500. And it's still available for the purchase or lease of battery electric or fuel cell electric vehicles. There is a requirement based on your income, so you need to meet some income eligibility requirements to qualify, and we'll go over what those are shortly. But this one is also available both at the point of sale and post-purchase. If you want to go the point of sale route, you have to get pre-qualified on the More EV website, and we'll go over how to do that. Then we've got two rows for basically adders. So the third row is what I meant. More EV Plus is an adder that can increase the amount of rebate you're eligible for based on your income. So if you meet the eligibility requirements that we'll go over, you can add $1,500 to either the More EV Standard or the More EV Used rebate. And this rebate is also available both at the point of sale or post-purchase. If you want to go the point of sale route, you do need to get pre-qualified. Then we've got More EV Trucks, which is the rebate program for trucks. For individuals, the only relevant one really is the $7,500 rebate for the purchase or lease of battery electric or fuel cell pickup trucks. There's some language here about the GVWR, the gross vehicle weight rating. but basically it amounts to, if you're looking at a pickup truck, it's $7,500, and there's a list on the More EV website of exactly which vehicles qualify. This is also available to businesses, nonprofits, educational institutions, and local, municipal, and state government. This one is not available at the point of sale. It's just available post-purchase. And then this presentation is really geared towards individuals who are looking for vehicles, but we did want to mention that More EV Trucks also has rebates for Class 3 through Class 8 vehicles. So anything from a transit van to a cement truck, basically, there are rebates available, and the rebate amount depends on the vehicle class. These rebates are available to businesses, nonprofits, educational institutions, and all levels of government. But we won't go through this in great detail because today we're really focused on the light duty vehicle side. So in these slides, we will go over the eligibility requirements for each of those programs, starting with More EV Standard. So to get this rebate, you just need to be a Massachusetts resident or a business or nonprofit located in Massachusetts. The vehicle must be a new battery electric vehicle or fuel cell electric vehicle. The MSRP, or the manufacturer's suggested retail price, must be under $55,000, and the vehicle itself must be on the eligible vehicles list, which is available at the More EV website. And you have to either purchase the vehicle or lease it for at least 36 months to be eligible. For More EV Used, the requirements are slightly different. So on the applicant side, you have to be a Massachusetts resident. This is not available to businesses or nonprofits. And then you need to prove either that you participate in one of a long list of income qualifying programs that I'll show in just a moment, or demonstrate that your modified adjusted gross income, or AGI, is under these limits. So the limit is $150,000 for those filing jointly, $112,500 for heads of households, and $75,000 for all other filers. A side note, these are the same income limits as the federal tax credit for used vehicles. But again, you just have to prove to the state More EV program that you meet one of those requirements. In terms of the vehicle requirements, it has to be a used battery electric vehicle or fuel cell electric vehicle. The model year must be at least 2 years earlier than the calendar year that it's purchased or leased in. The purchase price has to be under $40,000, and the vehicle cannot have received the More EV rebate in the last 3 years. In terms of program eligibility, again, you either have to purchase or lease for at least 36 months. And to claim this rebate at the point of sale, you must be pre-approved, and we'll go over that process in a moment. Moving from those sort of base rebates of More EV Standard or More EV Used, we'll now talk about More EV Plus, which again adds $1,500 to the rebate that you can claim. In terms of applicant eligibility, you have to be a Massachusetts resident, or you have to participate in one of a list of income qualifying programs. On the next slide, we'll talk about even more of these programs, but some familiar ones might be SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. But there's a whole long list that you can meet. One thing I want to make really clear is that for More EV Plus, you have to participate in one of these income qualifying programs. If you don't participate in one of these programs, you are not eligible. But for More EV Used, if you don't participate in one of those programs, but you do have an adjusted gross income under a limit, you do qualify. So that's a very slight distinction in the eligibility rules between More EV Used and More EV Plus. And again, if you want to claim the rebate at the point of sale, then you have to be pre-approved. I will pause on this slide for just a moment. These are all of the other programs that would make you eligible for More EV Used and More EV Plus. Again, we'll share these slides after the webinar, and this list is also on the More EV website. But as you can see, there's a whole long list of possible ways to qualify for More EV Used and More EV Plus. Now we're moving on to More EV Truck. So again, this is for pickup trucks, really. To be eligible, you either need to be a Massachusetts resident or a business, nonprofit, educational institution, or local municipal or state government. This rebate is available for new battery electric or fuel cell pickup trucks. And again, there's language about the gross vehicle weight rating, but really it just amounts to pickup trucks. And the MSRP limit for this is slightly higher because those trucks are more expensive. So instead of the $55,000 for More EV Standard or the $40,000 for More EV Used, the limit here is $80,000 for More EV Truck. And then in terms of program requirements, you have to retain ownership of the vehicle for at least 36 months, or if you're leasing, lease for at least 36 months. And then if you are an individual applicant, you may also be eligible for More EV Plus. But if you are a business, nonprofit, educational institution, or government, you do not qualify for More EV Plus. And then finally, we have More EV Trade-In. So this is the additional $1,000 that you may be eligible for if you're trading in an old gas-powered car at the same time that you're purchasing a new or used electric vehicle. So More EV Trade-In is available only to Massachusetts residents who are trading in a qualifying internal combustion engine vehicle at the same time as purchasing or leasing an EV. In terms of vehicle eligibility, there's a long list here. The vehicle must, or you must provide a vehicle inspection report from the Massachusetts Vehicle Check. The vehicle has to be an internal combustion engine, not including hybrid vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles. So the intention here is to really target the oldest, most polluting vehicles on the road. The vehicle has to be at least 12 years old. It has to have a market value. It must be a light-duty vehicle. It must be traded in at a licensed Massachusetts dealership, and it has to have been within your family's use for at least the 2 years prior to the trade-in date. So this is basically preventing you from going out and buying an old clunker on Craigslist and then trading it in. It has to actually be a vehicle that you've been driving and are taking off the road. And then in terms of program requirements, you apply online for this. You have to submit the required documentation within 90 days of purchasing or leasing an eligible new vehicle. And you apply after you've already received the More EV rebate at the point of sale, or after you've applied online for More EV Standard, More EV Used, and or More EV Plus. So if you get the More EV rebate at the point of sale, you have to wait for that application to really be processed before you can also apply for More EV Trade-In. But all of this is information that's available on the More EV website as well. So I know that was a lot, so we're gonna move right along here to the pre-qualification process for More EV Used and More EV Plus. So the good news is that this is all online. If you go to the More EV website at more-ev.org, you can create an account, and that will lead you through the process. For More EV Plus, you need to fill out this pre-qualification form before you purchase or lease a vehicle. You can demonstrate that you qualify by indicating which income qualifying program you participate in and uploading documentation of that, or uploading a copy of your driver's license. And then you can prove that way that you qualify for More EV Plus. For More EV Used, the process is very, very similar, with the addition that you can prove that you qualify by uploading a copy of your tax transcript to confirm eligibility based on your adjusted gross income, instead of proving that you participate in one of those income qualifying programs. But once you get to the More EV website and say what you're applying for, it makes it very clear what it is that you need to submit to get pre-qualified for either More EV Used or More EV Plus or both. So that concludes our run through of the More EV rebate program. We're now going to turn to the federal clean vehicle tax credits because these can be stacked right on top of the More EV rebate, but they work slightly differently. So before I launch into this, I have to read this slide that says very clearly that we are not tax professionals. We're not giving accounting advice. The information that we're providing here is purely for educational purposes. So with that caveat, I'll move right along. So the federal clean vehicle tax credit was instituted by the Inflation Reduction Act, and it creates both a new and a used clean vehicle tax credit. So we'll talk about those separately because they have slightly different requirements. For the new electric vehicle tax credit, the amount is up to $7,500 on eligible models. And that eligibility is determined by a list of battery and assembly requirements that we'll go over in a minute. The tax credit is valid through 2032 for battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. The credit can be claimed at the point of sale or when filing for your taxes. Either way, you have to purchase from a dealership that has registered with the IRS's Clean Energy Portal. And you, the purchaser, need to meet some income requirements. So your income needs to be under $300,000 for joint filers, under $225,000 for heads of household, and under $150,000 for individual filers. I mentioned that there are complicated rules that determine which vehicles are eligible. We will go over them here because people are curious about this, but I want to really stress that you do not need to memorize these. You can just find a list, and we'll show you how, of which vehicles are eligible and go from there. But if you're wondering why some vehicles are eligible and others aren't, there are 3 sets of requirements, and all 3 need to be met for the vehicle to be eligible. So the first is that the vehicle's final assembly requirement has to be in North America. So that's the United States, Canada, or Mexico. You can check this yourself with the vehicle identification number using the link that we've hyperlinked here, but it's much easier to just go through the dealership and let them tell you which vehicles qualify. There is an MSRP price cap. So for SUVs, vans, and pickup trucks, that is $80,000. For sedans and hatchbacks, it's $55,000. And then there are 2 sets of very complicated mineral and battery component requirements, where if the vehicle meets both of those requirements, it qualifies for $7,500. If it meets one but not the other, it's $3,750. And if it doesn't meet either of those requirements, then it's 0. So again, these are the components to figuring out whether an electric vehicle qualifies or not. But as a potential buyer, I would say just look at the list of eligible vehicles. Don't worry about these details in the background. When the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, it created this clean vehicle tax credit for individuals, but it also created a commercial vehicle tax credit that does not have the same complicated eligibility requirements as the one for individuals. What that means is that dealers, or basically leasing agents, can claim that commercial vehicle tax credit when they acquire vehicles from manufacturers to lease. And many are choosing to pass the value of that tax credit on to consumers in the form of either lower monthly payments or lower upfront costs. So if you're looking at electric vehicles online, you might see a lot of them are being advertised with a $7,500 lease rebate. That's basically the federal tax credit being passed on to consumers. So if you're looking at a vehicle that doesn't qualify for the clean vehicle tax credit, it might be worth considering leasing just to capture that incentive value. Moving on to used vehicles, there is now a federal tax credit for used electric cars. We've linked to a list of the manufacturers and models that qualify. The good news, at least, is that the complicated battery requirements that we just talked about don't apply. for used vehicles. So it's a much simpler process to figure out if a vehicle qualifies or not for the used tax credit. The amount is $4,000 or 30% of the sales price, whichever is lower. You have to buy from a dealership, so you can't just buy a used car from a friend. And the vehicle has to be at least 2 years old and cost less than $25,000. I'll note here that that limit is different from the limit for the Massachusetts rebate. So for the federal tax credit, it has to cost less than $25,000. For the state used rebate, it has to cost less than $40,000. And then there's a lower income threshold. So again, that threshold is $150,000 for joint filers, $112,500 for heads of household, and $75,000 for single filers. So how do you actually go about claiming this tax credit? You've got a couple choices. So you can choose to transfer the tax credit liability from yourself to an IRS registered dealership, or you can choose to claim the federal tax credit yourself when you're filing taxes. If you choose to transfer that tax credit liability to the dealership, you can choose to apply the value to the down payment of your car or towards the cost of an EV, or you can just receive cash. If you take it at the time of sale, your personal tax liability no longer matters because you're using the dealership's tax liability. But if you take it when you file your taxes, then you can only claim up to your federal tax liability. We've created a checklist if you're thinking about getting an EV to make sure you're doing all the things you need to get that federal tax credit. The first thing that you need to do is that you want to confirm that your expected income for the year is under the required limit. And again, those limits are different for new and used vehicles. If you think your income is going to be under that limit, then you want to make sure that the dealership or store that you're working with has registered with the IRS Energy Credits online portal. The best way to do this is to just ask a salesperson, or better yet, a general manager, and just have them confirm that yes, they are registered. Then when you're actually looking at a particular car, you want to ask the salesperson to confirm via the Energy Credits online portal that the vehicle qualifies for the federal tax credit. And then when you actually go ahead and purchase that vehicle, you want to make sure that you receive two documents. One is the time of sale report that the dealer submits in that Energy Credits online portal. And two is just a copy of the confirmation from the IRS that that submission went through successfully. You're going to need both of those pieces of paper for Form 8936, which you have to file during tax season. You have to do this even if you don't normally file for federal taxes, and even if you got the credit at the point of sale, you still need to fill out this form, and you'll need that time of sale report to do that. All of this is also written on our website. I know this is a long checklist to remember, but it's all written out for you so you can go into a dealership prepared. I mentioned a couple times that we have a resource that can help you figure out which vehicles qualify for which incentives. So this is available at greenenergyconsumers.org/drivegreen. We've got this for both new and pre-owned vehicles, where you can learn about different models. You can learn about their range, how fast they charge, what the base costs are, what the different trims are, and you can see which ones qualify for the federal tax credit and or the state rebate. So you can figure out, based on what kind of vehicle you're looking for and what your budget is, which models you should be considering. And so that is a resource that sort of combines what's available on the More EV website with what's available on the IRS website all into one place. And again, I'll send out the link to this resource in the follow-up email after the webinar. But then finally, to sort of pull this all together, I want to give an example of how this works in real life with a real vehicle. So when I looked online this week, I found a 2021 Chevy Bolt battery electric vehicle with 45,000 miles available at a dealership in the greater Boston area. The price is $17,660. The federal tax credit for this vehicle would be $4,000. The More EV used rebate, assuming you meet the requirements for it, is $3,500. And so if you add those together, that brings the final price down to about $10,000. If you also qualify for More EV Plus, which is $1,500, you can bring that down to $8,660. And if you also have an old gas-powered car that you're trading in, you can qualify for that additional $1,000, which will bring it down to $7,660. So this is just an example of how if you can stack all those incentives, you can really quite substantially bring down the cost of a used vehicle or a new vehicle to something that's much more affordable for more people. I'll turn to questions shortly, but I wanted to say that if you'd like to come see us in the real world, we're going to be at 2 events this weekend in different parts of the state. So on Saturday, we will be in Pittsfield with a community organization called Westside Legends. They have an annual soapbox derby, which is going to be a lot of fun, but we're going to have a little electric vehicle showcase as part of that event. And the starting arch will actually be inflated using one of the electric vehicles rather than a diesel generator. So we're really excited about that. And then on Sunday, we will be in Quincy, Massachusetts at the annual August Moon Festival put on by our partners at Quincy Asian Resources Inc. or Quarry. This is the 3rd time we'll be at this event. It's a huge cultural festival. It takes over an entire street, Coddington Street by the Y or the high school. And there's lots of food and music and fun, but we'll also have an EV showcase and more information about the More EV rebates. So we hope you can join us there. And with that, I will turn over to questions. And I see that there's been a fair number in the chat. So let's see. So, okay. Someone is asking if you sell an ICE vehicle, so an internal combustion engine vehicle privately, and then lease an electric vehicle from another dealer, can you get the trade-in rebate? That is actually an excellent question that I don't know the answer to, and I will find out for you. My understanding is that it's much easier if you're trading in the vehicle where you are also purchasing or leasing a new vehicle. But we will double check the eligibility requirements of that program and get back to you on that question. Let's see. There was a question on where to obtain that pre-qualification voucher for More EV. The answer is the More EV website. So if you go to mor-ev.org, you can create an account and apply for that pre-qualification voucher. That's something you want to do before you go out and purchase or lease a vehicle. And then there was a question about, is there a list of vehicles that qualify for the federal and or state incentives? Yes, looks like Caitlin put the link in the chat. So thank you for that, Caitlin. There's a question about how long you have to lease a new vehicle to qualify for More EV. The answer is 36 months, which most leases are 36 months. Very occasionally, some people lease for 24 months, but the minimum is 36 months to qualify for More EV. And then we've got a couple other sort of more technical questions on electric vehicles themselves, which I'm happy to answer because we're here. So there's one question about the different plug types. So when we were talking about DC fast charging, what we didn't go over in this presentation, but do go over when we do deeper dives into electric vehicles themselves, is that there are different plug types for DC fast charging. And the question is, if you have one type, can you use the other type? Are there adapters? So what I will say is that we are in a somewhat unique place right now in that all of the major manufacturers are slowly converging on one standard for charging, which is called the North American Charging Standard, which is basically the Tesla charger. So every major auto manufacturer has said that when they start putting out vehicles next year, those are going to have that NACS standard charging plug. In the meantime, manufacturers are slowly working on getting out adapters so that if you use a vehicle that has a CHAdeMO plug or a CCS plug, which are the other two standards, that you'll be able to use a North American Charging Standard charging unit. So far, I think it's really only Ford and Rivian drivers that have received those adapters. And I would say definitely if you currently drive an electric vehicle, wait for the adapter provided by or approved by your vehicle's manufacturer. There are some third-party adapters out there, but they might void your warranty if you use them. So definitely go. Unfortunately, this means waiting a little bit, but wait for the adapter from your manufacturer so that you know that the adapter you're using is safe and works for the vehicle. I think we've answered all the questions, unless I missed any, but I will say again, thank you very much for joining us today. We will send out a recording and the slides shortly, as well as lots of the links that Caitlin put in the chat. So thank you all for joining and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to my wonderful panelists. I'm going to start by introducing the panel, and I'm going to start with Ari Bernstein. Ari's title is about 4 lines long, so I have to read this. So Ari is the interim director of the Center for Climate Health and the Global Environment at the Harvard Chan School, and soon to be director of the National Center for Environmental Health and Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry at the CDC. So Ari, welcome. Caroline, whose title is blessedly shorter, is the professor of epidemiology at the Harvard Chan School. And Marcia, who is the chair of the Department of Global Health and Population and the Andalot Professor of Demography at the Chan School. So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much. So we're going to talk about climate and infectious diseases today. And we're going to do this in the same rhythm that has governed the previous panels. We'll start with the discussion of the problem, and then we'll move to solutions, and then we are going to save plenty of time for questions. So just tee up your questions. So to give you a sense of the problem, and as much as you need more of a sense of a problem after today, we're going to start with a video here. So if you could roll the video. So this is an animation from NASA, which illustrates the impact that climate is already having on our planet. And I realize I can't actually see the video. So
that's the mean surface temperature. It started in 1880 and will go until 2022. So.
Okay, so that is a sobering picture of our reality. So the bottom line is the Earth has warmed an average of 1.1 degrees Celsius since the Industrial Revolution, and you've heard of the global target of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and it is now likely that we will blow past that target in the next decade or so, although I have to say I'm a little bit heartened by our previous discussants from the EPA. But with this dramatic change in temperature has obviously come impact on many different aspects of health, including infectious diseases. And Ari, it is up to you to sort of scope that problem for us.
No problem. So thank you, Sarah, for moderating. And I want to thank Dean Williams for organizing this event. I think it's noteworthy that in this Climate Week, the Chan School stepped forward and put together what I think has been an extraordinary afternoon focusing on issues that are very personal and critical to moving us forward on climate action. And so I'm delighted by the turnout we have, and the speakers today have been extraordinary. Interestingly, if you look back at human understanding of climate change in the health sphere, infectious disease was sort of first out the door. And I find that interesting in a number of ways. Going back 30, 40 years, many of the first papers are like, it's getting warmer, we think insects are going to move somewhere, that seems like it could be a problem. And I want to say what's interesting, and you've got two people who really understand what they're talking about in terms of infectious disease next to me, so I'm going to be circumspect, or more circumspect than I might otherwise. But the reality is, when it comes to things that fly like mosquitoes, figuring out what climate change means ain't so easy. Now, that said, we definitely have seen climate signals. So anyone here worried about Lyme disease lately? Yeah. So Lyme disease is in Canada. The ticks that transmit Lyme disease are in Canada. It's pretty clear that they weren't there before, and it's pretty clear that that was because it got warmer. Now, many people say it's hard to tease out the human influence, right? So are we changing the forest ecology to make ticks present, or are we changing habitats? Are we? And that is one of the big challenges that makes the crystal ball, as I like to call it, of climate change and vector-borne disease hard to see through. But we have animal systems. So there's malaria in people, there's malaria in birds. And there's very good evidence that in places like Hawaii, birds have become endangered and gone and potentially extinct from avian malaria moving up mountainsides, which there are studies that are strongly suggestive that we have seen or are seeing in real time malaria moving up mountainsides in East African highlands, in Andean countries, and like. But when it turns out to the interface of climate infectious disease, I actually don't think as much about the vector-borne disease, although there's a lot to think about there. I think about diseases transmitted by water. Turns out that a lot of people in this country get water from wells, and when it rains a lot, which it's definitely doing in many places, or doesn't rain enough, you can get outbreaks of waterborne disease. That's true globally. So I think a lot about waterborne diseases. And I think about what many people call as indirect pathways. So I'm a pediatrician, right? Under 5 mortality in the world, heavily determined by diarrheal disease, right? So a large number of young children in the world are still dying from totally preventable diarrheal outbreaks. Now, why do they die? Well, they get infected, but their nutritional status is often lacking. And a big part of that is their vitamin A sufficiency. Turns out, and this is work of people like Sam Myers and others, if you juice our planet with carbon dioxide, the plants that feed us, and particularly mainstay plants that we really rely upon, guess what? They make less vitamin A. So in many ways, the infectious disease risks I think about are not the immediately apparent ones that were in people's eyes 30 or 40 years ago, like vector-borne disease. Really waterborne diseases and these indirect pathways, whether it's through CO2, through population migrations. We heard a lot about that earlier. It's very hard to deal with infectious disease outbreaks in places like refugee camps. We've seen this already, and the like. So that's maybe as short as I can overview of the window into climate and infectious diseases.
Perfect. So, Marcia and Caroline, I'm now going to ask each of you to give me an example of what's top of mind for you as you think about the nexus of climate and infectious disease. And Marcia, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I'm going to give one example of how some environmental changes that are happening now also contribute to the transmission of infectious diseases, but also to climate. So if we take deforestation in the Amazon biome, for example, from an infectious disease perspective, there are 2 aspects. First, the deforestation process is directly connected to an increase in transmission of malaria. And this is documented. That's not a hypothesis. That's highly documented. But also, as deforestation happens, humans get closer to this huge reservoir of viruses that are in the forest in different kinds of animal species. And the possibility of a new zoonosis emerging is also very high. In fact, I think we lucked out that nothing has emerged and created a problem so far. From a point of view of climate, deforestation produces less rainfall. And in fact, if you take the entire southern portion of the Brazilian Amazon, known as the Arch of Deforestation, it's already receiving less rainfall. So the drier season is longer by about a month on average. And by speeding up this process, then we can have all the things that Ari just mentioned. So if you take deforestation as one example, it increases the transmission of diseases right now. It can facilitate the emergence of new zoonoses, and it speeds up the process of climate change that in itself can also lead to more transmission. So no matter from which angle you look, it's a bad thing.
Okay, and just my job here is going to be to just provide the dictionary aspect of this. So the arboviruses are things like dengue, chikungunya, Zika, things you hear about all the time. Those are that set of zoonotic, arboviral diseases that are being pushed into human populations.
And many others. We
And
don't
many
even know.
others, yeah. Caroline.
So I guess building on what Marcia was saying, I think a lot about livelihoods, and there are also plant pathogens that we can't forget that are very important for farms and agricultural systems. And when we think about what happens when we have either extreme weather events or shifts in seasonality, if you're already living on the edge of poverty, then often that means that you have to leave the land. So when we think about climate migration, which is something I think about a lot, it's not just climate refugees, which is a huge problem for sure. It's also disruptions to seasonal labor migrants and the increasing rural to urban migration that we see as a result of changing patterns of the feasibility of different agricultural systems. And what that does is it not only connects us even more through mobility patterns, it also pushes people into urban and peri-urban environments where we have very high density of population. And so if you were going to design a perfect system upon which to spread a pandemic, you would put everybody in very close proximity in cities, and then you would connect them by global travel as much as you can. And that's exactly what we have. And in fact, we're now seeing that problem exacerbated. So it's exacerbated by climate, as Marcia pointed out, because we have people in closer proximity with environments where we have a huge diversity of potentially zoonotic emergence events. We've created a system that is not only driven by climate, it's also setting us up for increasing and worse pandemics. So that's something I think about a lot.
And Ari, do you want to add to that, sort of painting that picture beyond the landscape? Do you have more specific examples you'd like us to think about?
Well, one thing I would point out, and it's always great being with Marcia and Caroline because I'm learning something new every time. At this juncture, and having heard everything we've heard today, I think it's really apparent how critical it is we start to think about multi-solving, right? So deforestation, big problem for climate change, right? So maybe 20% of all emissions are coming from chopping down forests. Also a big problem for emerging infectious diseases. But when we think about the value of protecting forests, I can tell you that in policy debates, we're typically only talking about them as like literally carbon vacuums. I don't even know if we get to the deforestation as infectious disease risk. But the point is that we really need to think about intersectionality in the environmental movement. And I think we've seen that. A lot of the conversation has been focused on youth influence. That is clearly an influence of people who are a lot younger and smarter than me, having an influence for the better. And I think the good news is that we can actually do things that provide huge benefits, both to potentially infectious disease risk and also to climate.
Yeah, actually, so we had a prep session in anticipation of this panel. We are doing this entirely spontaneously. No script here. No, and actually this leads really to one of the points that Marcia made in the prep session. And do you want to expand on what Ari was discussing in terms of deforestation and the complexity both of deforestation, but solutions that have emerged?
Yeah, so there's a lot that can be done with regulation. And we know, again, that there's plenty of data showing that the indigenous territories in the Amazon are the most preserved and are the ones that really contribute by about 27% in absorbing PM 2.5 in the forest. Having new lands in the Amazon demarcated as indigenous territories is a big step forward in preventing areas from being deforested. By law, there is nothing like deforestation, mining, logging that should happen in those areas. And you can see in some satellite images, you can almost see where the boundaries are. However, and I mentioned legislation is not enough. And what we've seen in the last 4 years in Brazil is that those areas have been invaded by miners. I think everything really exploded end of January with a humanitarian crisis among the Yanomami that we had malaria, undernutrition, diarrhea, violence, and several diseases associated to mercury contamination. So it's way more than just the role of diseases we mentioned here. There is a study published last week mentioning that if we actually preserve the indigenous territories, we can save about 15 million cases of respiratory diseases and cardiovascular diseases, and save about $2 million from the health system just by protecting this. And we published a study last week showing that although indigenous lands have very little fires, they're not the ones producing the fires, they have twice the risk of having mortality because of exposure to the smoke. So regulation is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need measures of accountability. We need measures of enforcement so people that actually violate those laws can be held accountable. And then, there's not a message as we had in the past 4 years, go there and nothing is going to happen if you just cut down the trees.
And actually, can you say just a little bit more about measures of accountability and enforcement? At what level are those most effective?
Yeah, so in 2004, I think it was the peak of deforestation in Brazil. It was completely out of control. Then that's the first term of President Lula. And then they had several measures, first in protecting land. And again, now there have been already 3 indigenous lands that have been demarcated, none in the past government. In fact, some were removed in the past government. So legislation is one, but there were an entire network of surveillance that was put together on the Amazon. And people were actually, they had to pay fines. They were being held accountable. There was the entire satellite system that put together. Now we have daily alerts of deforestation. Every single day we know where things are happening, but knowing is not enough. You have to take action. So we had about 10 years of those things really happening in an effective way, and it was the most drastic decline in deforestation. In the past 4 years, everything reversed. And how did this happen? So a lot of the legislation was relaxed. A major legislation we had in the past, the Senate is trying to reverse this now, but they basically said every single indigenous land that has not been demarcated until 88, that's the year of the Constitution, they're going to lose it. I mean, they were the owners of everything. So, so pretty much every step forward that were made in terms of holding people accountable in piece of legislation in the past 4 years were put down. So it's going to take some time to bring those back, but,
So I'm going to go a little off script here, because actually what you just said about data is being important in terms of holding governments, holding us all accountable, seems resonant to actually, Caroline, a lot of your work. And I was wondering if you wanted to expand on that, sort of the importance of data.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. So I work a lot in infectious disease surveillance, and I work with control programs a lot to try and identify hotspots of transmission for resource allocation questions. What I would say is that on this topic, we have massive data gaps. And not just that we're not collecting data in a way that's integrated into health systems, which would be a first step, right? Environmental data and health system data in one place so that we can start to ask some of these questions. But I also think the types of data that we have available reflect certain global priorities that may not be local and regional priorities. So we may not be going after the right thing. And I also think there's a major problem with mechanistic data. So at the moment, we have a lot of beautiful maps, and we have a lot of associations, for example, between the length of time it takes a parasite to develop in a mosquito at different temperatures. And so what often happens is we get beautiful models where we take that sometimes nonlinear relationship, we tack it onto a beautiful map like this, and we get a projection of where we think dengue risk is going to be in 30 years or something like this. Those maps are useful for advocacy, but they are not useful data for control programs, and they're not mechanistic in the sense that we don't understand many of the social aspect, the economic drivers. These are not multidisciplinary efforts. And so I think there are two types of gaps on the data in terms of what we need to do. The first is that we need to start collecting environmental data as a matter of course within our health systems. And the second is we need to start building up mechanistic relationships in the context of some of the behavioral and social realities in places most affected. And that's still a huge gap.
So Ari, the other sort of data we have is our own learnings, and we just went through a pandemic. Is there anything that we can take from our response to COVID, done well or done badly, that we can now apply as we move forward?
We've got how much time?
You have about 3 lines.
I've got 3 lines, right. So I think one of the things that I was particularly impressed by, and this is to the faculty at the Chan School, was the pivoting on a dime to address this global health crisis, right? So you saw people of all backgrounds trying to figure out how we as a scholarly community could contribute. And I only got 3 lines, but one of the things that I think really spoke loudly to me was work of Francesca Dominici, who is here and may still be here, and her team, that underscored that when we think about air quality improvements, we tend to think about lungs, which is important. We think about mortality. So we know from the 6 Cities study that, among others, that air pollution is really bad for people living to their expected age. But it also turns out that even small amounts of difference in the air we breathe over a decade can have profound impacts on whether people lived or died from the pandemic. And that is a huge environmental justice piece. And so when we heard from EPA about these rules, when they talk about these benefits, whether it's from the mercury rule or the fuel economy rules, the air pollution rules from trucks, we haven't even included those yet. And so I think it's extraordinary that from this disaster, we can see the greater benefits of these actions we're doing on climate, particularly from an environmental justice standpoint. And I think that was one point that struck with me.
I'm going to take this moment to just take a brief time here and clarify my timing instructions because and I have 10 minutes until the 20 minutes. Got it. So I thought I only had 10 minutes left, and I was like, oh, there's something disastrously wrong. Okay, so actually, but with this little interlude, I just want to say we have about 10 minutes more conversation here. Cue your questions up. This is actually, I think all of the issues that we're discussing are reflective of the themes that you've heard through the day, and this would be a great time to have a broader conversation. So, okay. So I was wondering, actually, I wanted to come back to this question of equity and climate equity and infectious diseases. And Caroline, you've touched on this, so it's not just domestically, it's globally. And I was wondering if you could expound on the problems of migration and how that's going to, forced migration, and how that plays out, and whether you see any innovative solutions to what seems to be an intractable problem.
So I think when we talk about inequality, there's so many axes that we can talk about. There's, of course, large global inequalities between countries, and we saw that play out both in mortality, but also vaccine allocation and the frankly immoral distribution of vaccines around the world to different countries. And in the context of these intersecting health risks. So the problem with the climate and health intersection is that if you are already vulnerable, then any stress on the system is going to make you even more so, which we know from many different crises. But what it means on a global scale is that we have if you look at South Asia, we have millions and millions of people who are already affected and have been dealing with extreme weather events and gradual increases in temperature for a long time, who are going to be the ones, they're already feeling the effects now, and that will get worse into the future. And in terms of the mobility data that my group works on and some of the migration issues that we've seen, that has certainly been getting worse over time. With regards to solutions, I think we here in the global north have a lot to learn from our partners in the global south who have already been facing some of these challenges. If you look at Bangladesh, they do a great job of responding to cyclones. because they've been dealing with it for many years. And I think we will continue to see innovation from our Global South partners when it comes to some of the challenges of heat adaptation, figuring out how to respond in the wake of natural disasters. And so I think meaningful academic partnerships that reflect where climate change is having the most impact, which populations are most affected, and really trying to understand and listen to some of the researchers there on the ground is going to help us not just prioritize, but also come up with some of the innovations that we need. Because I think if you look at what happened with COVID, the same epidemic was not the same in different communities in terms of mortality, in terms of response, and in terms of how policies were enforced. And so I hope that in the wake of the pandemic, we will have a kind of reimagination of global health partnerships in the context of the climate emergency as well. So I've given you no solutions, but I think the way forward has to be a kind of major global effort to think in an integrated way about some of these challenges and not assume that we know people's realities.
No solutions, but you did actually remind me of something Marcia was discussing in the prep session and around solutions that have come from the indigenous communities. And Marcia, I was wondering if you wanted to.
Yeah,
about
so
that.
again, in the context of the Brazilian Amazon, a lot of the problems we see now in terms of equity really come from a predatory model of the so-called development that is just based on exploitation of resources, ignoring local people, their culture, their knowledge, their needs, everything. So to me, if we really want to address equity, it really starts from listening, understanding, and working together. So anyone that comes here and say they have the solutions for the Amazon and they've never been in the Amazon and they don't practice the listening, understanding, and working together, it's wrong from the get-go. So we have, thanks to a program that was put together when President Lula was president the other term, a lot of energetic and really bright young indigenous leaders made it to the university, and they are now really leading their communities in fighting for their rights, in improving education, in improving community health. They use drones to fight for environmental justice. And we recently, now in this new term of President Lula, for the first time ever in our history, our meaning in Brazil, we have a minister of the indigenous peoples. So this is an incredible opportunity to give voice to the unheard. And that's how you address equity. It's bringing those people to the table, sharing their knowledge. They have solutions we never thought about. And I think this is one of the clear examples of if there's a will, there's a way. Where I think we're finding a way, and we hope we can continue on this path to address some of the issues on equity that we have.
Okay, so this is the time when people who have questions should start making their way around. And Ari, yes?
Well, I was thinking if I can get one more shot at the
Please,
solutions piece,
yes.
because we
Oh,
need
God, yes.
solutions. So I was listening to Marcia and Caroline, and I think for many of us, there's an unprecedented awareness to the divergent paths of the richer countries in the world and the low and middle income countries of the world that the pandemic showed us. I mean, pandemics show us in the most painful way what we need to fix in the world. And in the aftermath, I think one of the things that many of us realized is that our foundational approach to dealing with infectious disease, and I'm mindful I'm going to the CDC, so be careful here, is frankly a reactionary approach. It's let's wait for people to get sick and then try and fix it after the fact with tests, drugs, vaccines. Now, we're always going to need that. There are always going to be infectious outbreaks. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we have this huge population. We're interconnected. I like to think of that as sort of the lighter fuel of global pandemic risk. But the kindling for it is actually how we're doing business with nature. If you look at most of, and certainly the pandemics, but most of the major emerging infectious disease risks, they're coming from other animals, sometimes livestock, sometimes wild animals. And we have enormous opportunities to prevent the movement of those diseases into people. We do it to a certain extent now. But when we looked at how much we're investing in what I would call these primary prevention strategies. So I'm a pediatrician, right? So pediatricians, we're all about preventing people from getting sick. And most of the people I talk to, we tend to like to just not get the cancer first, not get treated for the cancer, not get the heart attack, I think all of us prefer to just not have as many of these emerging infections from things spilling from animals into people. And when we look at this, it is the best buy on the planet, especially when you look at the reality that some of these strategies involve conservation of nature potentially. So the other thing we always got critiqued about in this work was, well, how do you know this stuff's going to work? And I said, I don't know that we do, because we don't have the data we need. We don't have trackers. There's more paradigms, but they're very small. But then we said, well, how ineffective can these things be to still make them cost effective? And they can be radically ineffective. Why? Because the value of doing these things creates benefits to health equity. So think about this, folks. Most of the emerging infectious disease crises happen in low and middle income countries. The resources that get deployed are in rich countries. So whether it's the vaccines, the tests, the drugs that aren't getting there like need to, the profits are going to rich countries and their corporations. The damages are greatest in low and wealth countries. But when you prevent at the source, when you stop these events from happening in the first place, the benefits accrue greatest in these communities. So there's work from Matt Bonds, and who's at HMS, and Andy Dobson looking at data out of Rwanda, where they show this fascinating interplay between infectious disease burden, economic development, which is nothing new. That's been known for a long time, that infectious disease burdens create poverty traps, but the ecological substrate of the community. So there's this interplay. If you are poor, what are you going to do? You're going to rely more on nature. Chris Golden's work, Chris was here, his work in Madagascar has shown this. The people who are most at risk in many places for iron deficiency anemia in Madagascar, they need to have wild animals to provide food. And if you take that away from them, they're likely to have nutritional deficiencies. So we see this globally. So you have infectious disease burdens, that drives poverty, it drives greater destruction of nature, and what happens when you destroy nature? You risk having more infectious disease outbreaks. So the point here is you can get a win for equity, a win for climate, and you can protect communities that are where these diseases tend to erupt.
Fabulous. I just am so mindful that people haven't had time to have questions, and so it's all you.
Hi, my name is Erika Arteaga, and I am from Ecuador. And it's great to be here, but also I was telling people that in climate change, you need to have hope, and I'm totally here disheartened because my country is living a huge violent wage with narco traffic and narco drug dealers. So my question is regarding prevention in low-income countries, middle-income countries, and Brazil. I'm just going to quote an Uruguayan journalist. His name is Raúl Sibeki, and Raúl Sibeki wrote something regarding Peru. I'm tackling all the region because I think narco traffic and narco warlords are a problem of Latin America, and I'm going to tell you the link between climate change. So Raúl Sibeki was interviewing Rocio Silva Santiesteban, a former congressman, a leftist and human rights activist, and she said that an emerging bourgeoisie that is anchored in the illegal economy, often linked to drug trafficking, and that has its representatives in all parties from the extreme right to the host of the post Pedro Castillo. This neo bourgeois sector rejects the legal rules but embeds itself in the power apparatus because it needs to have a protective umbrella for its business and interest. Then he goes on and saying 27% of all imported mercury goes to illegal mining from Peru and Bolivia, a trade that follows the Amazon route from Puerto Rico, the Puerto Maldonado to Lake Titicaca, and half of the 1,100 tons of mercury that arrived in Bolivia between 2014 and 2022 come from Mexico, exported by Mexican businessmen with Peruvian intermediaries in small and medium-sized containers. The Amazon regions of Peru and Bolivia are the main producers of gold, and he goes on and on with more data, saying these businesses in our region are super hard to follow because Pandora Papers, there's a scandal of paradises, fiscal paradises and everything. And so we now have in the region a very intermingled situation between narco traffic, warlords, mining, illegal mining, extractivism, territories devastated by violence. We have beheaded people every day in Ecuador, all day in the main cities. So my question is, how long do you think it would take to arrive to the indigenous communities in Brazil? And this is much more huge problem because little countries like mine or Latin America is not going to solve narco warlord drugs. We need to stop consumption or legalize it or something, but it's not thing that we can do without a global effort.
So you're saying how long it's going to take for this violence to arrive?
Yes.
It's there already.
with narco warlords?
Yes.
So Lula is not going to be able to.
No. We gotta be optimists. Remember the previous session. So, right? Yeah, I am. So there is one area in the westernmost part of the Amazon. That's where I do field work on malaria. Now it's in the route of the drugs, and we had to change the entire way we work because they just call us and say leave. And then we have to leave. So, but again, how did that happen? So I'll just give you one example, and those are the things we have to reverse. The previous president made it very easy to buy a gun. And in this country, we know what that happens, right? So the increase in gun ownership was like 4,000%. It's ridiculous. So the first time I went to the Amazon was 99. It's a very different Amazon now because people are armed. Now, how we're going to fix this? To me, that is one of the big challenges because people are just killing. And I don't know exactly how this is going to happen. It's going to take time. But that's the big change we had from when they implemented that plan back in 2004 and now. It's the region is armed. So.
Hi, I'm Karina Weinstein. I work for FXB and I work with Youth Climate Advocates, but I'm actually here as a parent who feels really failed by the health system and health professionals. And there was a panel earlier about climate change being personal. Well, infectious disease and Lyme disease is so personal to me. When about 7 years ago, my 5-year-old contracted Lyme meningitis, between onset of symptoms to diagnosis, we saw multiple health professionals, emergency room, neurologists, multiple pediatricians. No one suggested to include Lyme in his blood work. No one knew what that was. It was just by mere whim that we did the blood work, and I asked the pediatrician, he didn't suggest it, to check for Lyme, and then, he was treated, which a 5-year-old being treated for Lyme meningitis was like so complicated, and I'm still traumatized. But now, 7 years later, what I reflect on is that the system failed me. Like, as a parent, I had to navigate. How is it possible now that I know with all this research emerging around infectious disease and increase in prevalence of Lyme as a result of climate change, how is it possible that no one guided me, that that wasn't 3 weeks of debilitating neurological symptoms to finally said, God bless that pediatric infectious disease mammonitis who looked at my son and in 5 minutes said, he has Lyme meningitis. It's so obvious. But for 3 weeks before, I mean, you can only imagine as a parent. Fast forward to now, I have another child, his younger brother, who has severe allergies and asthma. Again, the multiple health professionals that we see, the endless pulmonologists, allergy immunologists, pediatrician visits, and no one helps me plan for these like expanded allergy seasons. We're not talking, a few weeks a year. Now we're talking endless allergy seasons. The nurse calling me, this child, swollen and in times of the year when you least expect it, and much longer. It's so I don't know. I guess what I keep reflecting on now that I work in this space and follow the research is what can we do to strengthen the health system, the training of health professionals, because ultimately, I feel like I'm being failed as a parent, or I don't have the partners that I need to help manage my children's health, and I'm always just like a few steps behind, or just really frustrated and really tired. Thank you, Dr. Bernstein, I guess, but anyone else?
I think actually, yes, but I just want to, maybe you could reflect on both that incredible frustration and pain that the patient side feels in terms of navigating the changing landscape, but also what it's like to be a provider in a world where actually the tapestry is also changing.
So first of all, thank you for speaking up. I wish I could say you're the first parent whom I've heard with very similar sentiments about the enormous disappointment of dealing with medical providers who simply just aren't aware of what's going on and how children are left behind. And so I think the more parents like you are vocal about that, the more it agitates for people like me and people in this room and people in this audience to realize that we actually do need to do better, that the status quo is not okay, and that the profession of medicine actually does need to be accountable to climate change, which I think we can be pretty optimistic that that's happening. I'm very proud to say that our center was the first in the world, founded in 1996 at Harvard Medical School, at a time when people saw climate change as a problem for polar bears. and nothing to do with people. And so over the ensuing, quarter century, we can now say that in the Harvard Medical School curriculum, every Harvard Medical student that graduates Harvard Medical School is going to have to confront this. But it's not just Harvard Medical School. There's a huge trajectory nationally. Our School of Public Health, we are working on an integrated curriculum so that every student at the Chan School will learn about these things, so that parents like you are not wondering why their pediatrician doesn't realize that the kid's cold in March is not a cold, that in fact it is allergies, or the child who, it's not just Lyme disease. We have a whole suite of tick-borne diseases. We have fungal diseases, coccidiomycosis, valley fever from the Valley of California. I'm looking at Kari, who is practicing this. It's showing up in the upper Midwest. It showed up in Boston. And so this changing tapestry is very real. And sometimes it takes some parents with a little bit of motivation to help, people are very happy saying we're okay, to realize that we need to change. But I want to emphasize that having been at this for a while, and again, I would give full credit to the medical students. I don't think this would have happened had it not been, they organized nationally on this. There are students at most of the medical schools in this country, students at schools of public health, including our school, have organized on this and pushed us to embrace the reality that you've seen.
Okay, this guy has had questions every session and he always gets cut off.
That's Josh.
He's an alum of our
Josh, sorry.
school.
Okay,
He's an alum of our
nice.
school.
Yes, okay, Caroline.
I just wanted to add to this. So there's also a
Okay.
fundamental problem here where things that with infectious diseases that are rare,
Yeah.
that may not be rare in the future, and especially in the context of emerging pandemics in, sometimes in low and middle income countries where we may not be familiar with the biology and transmission of pathogens that emerge, and we will need to be ready. So there's going to be a shift in what's rare everywhere that we will need to learn about. But right now, there's CEPI, which is trying to make vaccines against some, pandemic-prone but now rare infectious diseases. But the funding models have to change also for research to reflect pathogens that have pandemic potential and are important already in parts of the global south, but have not yet become common enough here for people to be well-versed in them. And so I think, again, we have to shift our whole mindset about what it means to be rare, what might be rare now but will not be rare in the future, and have a much more adaptive system of research funding allocation and focus, frankly, when it comes to pandemic preparedness as well.
And data. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we do. Josh. I know. I just was mindful that he got cut off last time. So.
Yes. Thank you. So I'm an alum of the school. I now work on these issues in the federal government. And I'm wondering if you all could talk about how you walk the boundary between these issues aren't so simple. They are complex, but not so complex that we just throw up our hands and give up.
Caroline.
I do think that some fields are due for a major reckoning. And I think that for those of us in infectious disease, I think we all need to think very seriously about the research, what the important research priorities are, and how we can stop paying lip service to saying the word interdisciplinary and actually doing interdisciplinary work. And I don't just mean, I collaborated with a physicist, so it counts. I mean, like, cross-university, cross-country, real collaborative conversations. At the moment, one of the things that's hard is that we're all scrambling for time. It's very hard to have long, deep, thoughtful conversations and read the scientific literature across fields and speak each other's languages. I think we have to really prioritize truly multidisciplinary research, because when you do, I think extraordinary things can happen, and we start seeing innovation flourish. But we can't do it without really re-examining research priorities and our abilities to break down silos, because universities kind of create silos by mistake over time, and we need to find real ways to come together on some of those issues.
Actually, sorry.
A very quick answer, Josh. We can't give up because we don't have another planet to live. It's everyone's responsibilities here. So it's challenging, it's frustrating, but we got to keep moving.
I also think there is some low-hanging fruit. There are some really basic things we just need to go out and measure well and start doing the work.
Well, and a lot of room for innovation, right? Actually, just in thinking of the infectious disease diagnostic question, actually new technologies, AI is going to be our friend in terms of thinking about how to practice medicine adaptively.
Right,
And so there's a lot of room for really radically rethinking how we do business.
Yeah, we have now like paper-based, multiplexed assays, so you can tell more than one disease on a, and it's heat stable, and you can get it out into different places. There's a ton of things happening. It's just about translation, I think.
Okay, Kari, I feel like there is a person standing behind you. You should have the last word anyway, so you go.
Hi, my name is Anna Makritz. I work as a public health epidemiologist, and I want to speak to 2 points that you raised earlier. Speaking to Caroline in particular, but curious to hear anyone's thoughts about data and thinking about some of the gaps that you identified in our current data systems. So one, thinking about, as you said, the need for data on the environmental side and then the human health side to be combined in a way that can be usable and operationalized. So I'm wondering, at what level you foresee that being able to have the greatest effect, and what feasibly, given our politicalized, often public health system in our country, where that can happen most effectively, if that needs to happen at the state level, at the federal level, more locally. That's one question. And then another question was thinking about, you mentioned having the need for data to be driven not only by the sort of global or sort of predominant priorities, but by local priorities. And I'm wondering there whether, or if you could describe some examples of places where maybe qualitative research has helped to inform the way that data systems are collected. And then sort of again with that and thinking about the silos in which we work, whether it be like the academic public silos or within either of those 2 spheres, how you see opportunities for bridging those silos through this type of restructuring of how we collect data.
Okay, I'll try. As far as, well, actually, parts of your questions are, I think, together. So I think the local prioritization is also the data prioritization. And so I think partly because the spatial and temporal scales of the climate world and the health systems world are slightly different in a lot of places, it's hard to bring data sets together quite often. So I think we need more granular data. And I really... during the pandemic, I think what we saw a lot of was the collection of surveillance data for the sake of collecting surveillance data, as opposed to collecting data in order to make a decision differently. And so what I would like to see is local prioritization that is actionable. So I think in this country, I'm not an expert in the US health system, but I think my experience during COVID suggested that state level and even more local collection of data that could drive decision-making at that scale is something that would be really great. Because quite often, and this happens in many countries where I work, the environmental data available is available on huge spatial scales, or it's from climate models, and the resolution of the data isn't fine enough in order to be able to link it meaningfully with health data. And so creating those mechanistic, as it were, links between some of the variables that we have in climate models in larger scale and health systems and your actual patient data is going to be very important. So, and then what was the second part?
So thinking about like qualitative data.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So about halfway through the first year of the pandemic, I think I wrote a paper about how important human behavior was in models getting it wrong. I think there has been a certain arrogance in academia in general that places quantitative methods above qualitative methods somehow. So we had a lot of people making SIR models because they knew math, with no sense of local context and the impact of social contact patterns and the importance of human behavior and trust and all of those things, or the nature of epidemiological data and how it's collected. So I think we need to be much more systematic about bringing qualitative data into our modeling frameworks and into the way that we think about infectious disease epi data in general. The ways to do that, I mean, again, I think it's partly a mindset of making sure that you have collaborative teams that that come from different aspects of the problem. And I think we need to readjust our biases and recognize how key local context is to informing some of our methods. And a lot of that is qualitative data and local expertise. So it's essential. It's not always easy to do. I think it's easier to publish papers that don't do that than it is to actually do translational science that has to take that into account. But it's a very important goal.
So thank you. And then Kari, you get to close us out here.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. And we're looking forward to our next keynote speaker at 5 p.m. Or around there. But I wanted to really leave this discussion with kind of a catalytic ask. And I know, Sarah, you had mentioned that you'd like perhaps these questions to be more general, because we've seen throughout the day sessions that discuss heat stress, sessions that discuss environmental justice, sessions that discuss how the government can play a role in working with us. But now I want to get back to we as public health officials and public health researchers, and also individual health practitioners. With that in mind, as you think about the future and you think about what we've done now in public health and what we do, measure, manage, monitor, we quantify, we qualify, and then we implement, and then we practice public health. The issues around climate change are so centered around planetary health and public health. How can we do better? How can we innovate? Because in any one child's lifetime now, they will suffer through at least one climate change event. How can we do better at modeling for any one point in time environmental exposures? And being in environmental health, this is really important to me and our group as to how we can serve the public health community better. Because any one individual is not just getting an infectious disease exposure, they're getting wildfire smoke exposure, they're getting heat stress exposure, they're getting vitamin A decreases because of the food that they eat has been heat stress. So with all of that, how can we best be innovative in terms of multiplicative modeling of multiple exposures at any one point in time, but also longitudinally over someone's lifetime? That to me is part of what, Caroline, you're saying with data, obtaining that and making sure that we can use it effectively. But let's lead the way as public health practitioners and public health researchers to be able to move that forward, because I think it's going to help our policymakers. But do you think that's possible today? And if not, how do we get there?
Can I just say, I'm mindful that it is 5 o'clock, and that feels like a call to arms more than a question. Did you want to pose that as a question, or do you want to pose that as a challenge to us as we move
I think
forward?
it is both, absolutely.
Okay, if it's a question, then Caroline, you get the, well, it's 5:05, so you get the sort of how synthetic data modeling wizard.
Honestly, I think it's a mindset, and we have to, we have to come together as a public health research community and be very serious about it, and not, there are always academic pressures that we all face all the time, and we are all very busy people, and trying to get grants and so on. But I think this is a good moment for us to re-examine our priorities. All of us are here and we're doing the work we do, presumably because we really care about this. And as Marcia says, there's nowhere else to go. This is our world. And so I think it's a mindset issue. We can do it now. We can go out and do a better job and measure differently and collaborate. And I think it's just an issue of will, mindset. Of course, funding has to be there to make it happen. But I think, this event and some of the developments around the school and the university suggest that people are starting to really come together and take it seriously. And I hope that I hope that we can.
So very quickly, just one thing to add. I agree with everything you said, but I think this has to be done with the public health officials. So I work with malaria. I work with the folks on the National Malaria Control Program in Brazil for almost 15 years now. And, I think compared to the US, Brazil has much better data. And now we are ready to move in a direction because we have alerts of deforestation and of opening of mining daily, where ready to go into a predictive model that they can run every single week and take action and try to prevent new cases. But this takes time. That's what I was going to say. It has to be done with the public health officials, and it takes time to build trust. It's not going to work if you just do in our environment here, publish a paper in Science, yay, but it's not going to change anything, nothing at all. Most likely it's going to be done with the wrong scale. It's annual. I'm sorry, there's seasonality within the year. So if you publish something annual, it can be great for science, but it's going to do nothing to reduce transmission. So it has to be done with them, listening to them, and there is a need for capacity building, because if they don't understand why this is important, not their fault, but it's not in their curriculum, it's not going to happen. So again, I think we have a role in raising awareness, training, being humble, training, but also listening and working with them, developing models that lead to the change, not just lead to a paper in Science. So that's what I
Or not even in Science.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When I communicate these results to public audiences, I think it's really important to talk to them about being able to talk about what's happening with their friends as one of the most important things that they can do.
Knowing what I know about the science and the projections, that puts me into a state of grief.
Because sometimes you hear this information, it's scary, and you kind of shut down, and you either go into a denial phase or depression, and I've been there. I've been depressed about these results many times.
I feel it personally. I have a new granddaughter, first granddaughter. She's 10 months old now.
And I almost feel like we need to have this team of, psychologists or therapists go into communities that are dealing with climate change to allow people to process all of these emotions.
The lost opportunities, the displacement, the loss of a world that we as a species have known since our beginning.
It's not fair for us as scientists to come in and say, this is what we know, this is what's happening, and this is what you have to do, without allowing people to emotionally respond to that information. And for me, keeping myself out of the depression mode is in large part engaging in solutions. And for me, part of that solution is educating people and helping them reach that point of acceptance about reality, not acceptance as in giving up, oh, there's nothing we can do, or it's so bad, it's horrible, but acceptance that the future is going to be different, and not to fight that feeling anymore, but to accept that feeling and then move a step past that and say, well, how do we want this to play out?
There's no question that the number one control knob for how our cryosphere is going to change is humans.
The future is not just a place that we get to go to. It's a place that we get to create together. The future is not written yet. We get to choose that pathway.
Is anger appropriate?
Yes. That's a good source of energy. You can channel that energy of anger into some very productive action. But it's productive only after you've reflected on the anger and where it's coming from and where it's directed.
We are nowhere near a point where we should put our heads in the sand or throw up our hands and feel that there's not something we can do. Absolutely, there are many things we can do, and indeed what we do will be the primary determinant of what things look like in the future.
So instead of looking at those graphs and thinking, that's our destiny, we can say, no, we can make a choice and choose a different pathway.
I understand that we can sometimes feel despondent and feel like it's out of our hands. There's nothing that we can do. But that is not, as somebody who works with this system, over the past 10 years I've been working in permafrost, that's not the impression that I have.
We are really in the first step of what is going to be a very long process, because these ice sheets may take hundreds of years, thousands of years to respond even just to the warming that we've already caused today. And so that's an ongoing journey.
So I really do see a sea change, lots of people from all kinds of different backgrounds getting engaged, realizing that we are causing the problem, that's not reason to despair. That's reason to take hope, because that means we can be the solution. Right? If it was something else causing climate change, we wouldn't have anything that we could do about it. Since it's us, it's absolutely within our control to change how we live, to protect the climate system, and ensure a better future.
You know how therapists can say that if you're not working toward a relationship, you're working against it? Well, that same theory can apply to climate change. We can ask ourselves, are we personally working towards helping the environment, or are we working against it? So let's talk about which actions can actually help the climate and which aren't so effective. Recycling. Many of us do it, but is it just garbage? Perhaps, says Christopher Jones, the director of the Cool Climate Network.
A lot of the recycling that we do does not end up contributing to reductions. We have to haul that material around. It often ends up in a landfill. Some of the metals that we recycle, those do end up in manufactured products. Metal in particular is very, very useful to recycle, but much of the rest of it, plastics and things, just contribute to more emissions because it gets shipped around and doesn't actually end up in products.
But the act of recycling isn't total trash.
Anything we can do to lessen the materials we're putting into the atmosphere and creating new materials is a good thing, but it's not the gold solution I would advocate for.
So what is? Climate offsets are a new climate buzzword. You may have seen an offer to buy an offset when you purchased a plane ticket or a product online. The idea is that you can offset the pollution caused by your flight or your package by paying for someone else to reduce or remove pollution, like planting trees or installing solar panels. But do these offsets actually help?
Offsets are not baloney, but they are complicated. So an offset works if you are absolutely certain that you're taking a molecule of carbon or greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere that would otherwise never have come back out of the atmosphere. You have to actually make sure you're pulling more out than would have happened without your investment, without your dollar, without that tree. And that can be hard to prove because, for example, let's say you say, well, I'm going to plant all these trees over here, and that's absolutely pulling out more carbon. But what if you did that in a place that was going to be put out for development, and so the developer just went someplace else and cut down all those other trees?
And in some cases, offsets can actually do more harm than good.
The important part about an offset is not to call it an offset, because an offset is kind of a license to continue your behavior. It's an excuse in some sense to, continue to pollute. And that is the danger, that people don't change their behavior, or maybe even there's what we call a rebound effect, where they actually do more of what we don't want them to do because they think there's a little impact of it.
So if recycling and carbon offsets aren't making the cut, what can? We can start by looking at our own personal carbon footprint.
A personal carbon footprint, or climate footprint, accounts for all greenhouse gas emissions associated with all of your consumption. So that's everything from travel, energy, food, goods, services. Anything that you buy contributes to your carbon footprint.
You can calculate your carbon footprint using one of these websites. The links are in the description below. To give you a little perspective, globally, the average annual carbon footprint of a person is 6.5 tons. But the average American's carbon footprint is more than double that. Most of this comes from the big three: our buildings, our transportation, and our food.
I often call it coal, cars, and cows. Those are the three big emitters. So if you can reduce your emissions from those three, then you're off to a good start.
Let's start there with coal. The US is using much less coal than it used to. But in many states, Power plants are still burning coal and natural gas to generate electricity. And this releases loads of carbon pollution and heats up our climate. So switching your home to renewable sources like wind or solar can actually reduce your carbon footprint by 1.5 tons a year.
Put solar panels on your house or buy into a community solar project, and then talk about those things. Talk about them with your friends and your neighbors, because there's a social contagion. We know that the more solar panels are on the roofs of houses in a neighborhood, the more likely other people in that neighborhood are to want to put solar on their own roof.
A lot of us also burn fossil fuels inside our homes when we turn on gas-burning stoves, water heaters, and furnaces. But you can swap those for more efficient appliances that rely on electricity instead.
And so switching out those water heaters, make them electric, have them use the solars, have heat pumps that actually are very cost effective in the long term and heat and cool your home can make a massive difference.
And in the US, new federal tax credits can help homeowners pay for all of these upgrades. But even if you're a renter, there are things you can do at home to cut down your carbon. These include setting your washing machine to a cold wash. It takes a lot of energy to heat water, so by switching to a cool wash, you can cut the energy you use by more than half. You can also shed carbon by turning your thermostat down 2 degrees in the winter and up 2 degrees in the summer. We can all make a global difference from inside our homes. Cars, our roads are clogged with them, most burning diesel or gas. Now, living car-free can reduce your carbon footprint by about 2 tons a year, but for many of us, that's just not possible. But does swapping out your current car for an electric one really make a difference?
It absolutely makes a difference because you're no longer dependent on fossil fuels and you're not adding additional fossil fuels just through the consumption of your car. Now, of course, how you charge your car is really going to influence how much difference that car is making. So if I had an electric vehicle and I charged it at home and my energy is coming from solar, huge difference, right? I just eliminated all of my carbon footprint from my transportation. And if everybody did that, it would make a massive difference.
So driving an electric vehicle can lower your carbon footprint by about 1 ton per year and save you money. And talking about the actions you're taking is even better.
One of the best ways we can make progress on climate is talking about it and communicating more about it. So that's what's going to change human behavior, and that's what we need to do.
You know, we got an electric car. We talk about it. We show it to people. We let our neighbors drive it. That's a way to expand what you do beyond your own little life.
Now to the cows. About 1/3 of the world's carbon pollution is linked to the food we eat.
In food consumption, the things to think about are, 1, how did your food get to where you are purchasing it? Did it get trucked in from halfway across the country? Did it get flown up from Chile in the middle of winter when you're sitting in New York? That adds to your carbon footprint. 100% what you eat can really impact your carbon footprint. There are some more carbon intensive foods. Meats are often in that category.
Cattle are the #1 agriculture-related source of climate warming gases. Just one cow belches out about 220 pounds of methane each year. And methane is 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide in warming the planet. So consuming less red meat and dairy is the most straightforward way to lower your carbon footprint. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, to avoid a 2 °C rise in global temperatures, the average global footprint needs to drop to under 2 tons per year by 2050. So it's important to think bigger than just you. Joining with others, using your voice, and using your vote multiplies your impact.
But every vote counts. And as much as it doesn't feel as satisfying as going solar or buying an electric car, it's a hugely important thing to do because so much of the revolution that we need to see to mitigate climate is going to be driven by political incentives and probably regulations over time. And that will only happen if we have governments that think about climate change.
We need to realize that this problem is not going to be solved voluntarily by individual action. It's going to take larger system change. We can be part of that change. A system is made up of people.
Just knowing people are aware that every action matters, I think gets us steps closer to where we go, but also it's fulfilling to know that you can help be part of the solution.
We all have a carbon footprint. It may be big or small. The number matters less than what you're doing about it. Live your life with the climate in mind and know you can make a big difference. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel.